Hey guys, Joe Garth here, creator of Brushify.io. I recently took part in a podcast with Ryan Kingsliens. Ryan runs a website called GameArtInstitute.com. The site has some really cool classes on 3D design, environment creation, and some other really cool subjects. So if you want to check that out, there's a link in the description below. So without further ado, here's the podcast.
Hey there, welcome to the Ryan Kingsliens Show. My name's Ryan Kingsliens, and in this podcast, we interview amazing artists, creatives, and creators to find out how they tick and how they got where they are today. So sit back, relax. I look forward to sharing their journey with you. All right, well, welcome, Joe, man. Thank you so much for coming in.
Good to be here, man.
Yeah, it's great. I've been really looking forward to this conversation. You kind of made some pretty serious waves out there with this recent project, huh?
Yeah, it was cool. Yeah, it was basically just working through over Christmas and since about September, and then we finished it up just before GDC.
Wow, it's amazing. I remember I saw that and I was just like, oh my God, this is so much validation for what I believe for real-time art, I guess is what you might say. A huge validator. So much potential.
Yeah, it's one of those things that you just don't see it every day, right? Just so much attention to detail and in real time. And I think that's sort of like it's a different approach to what people are used to seeing, because now we've got this access to all the photogrammetry stuff. Mm-hmm. And, we've got such a powerful game engine that you can just throw polygons in there and it doesn't really mind, it doesn't really matter anymore. You got so much to work with. And combine that with all the shader stuff, and we get into that later. But yeah, it's amazing. I'm totally addicted to Unreal right now, if you can't tell.
Really?
But yeah,
you have a whole company kind of built around tools for that to some extent, yeah?
Yeah, pretty much. I started about a year and a half ago, sort of coming up with various tools for Unreal, pretty much focused around sort of shaders and sort of procedural generation of environments, that kind of stuff. And, started producing or attempting to produce sort of biomes for every single, different earth biome that you could think of, right? So like grasslands, deserts, mountains, and all of these kind of generic places that you just see all the time in games. And you think, well, why are we rebuilding this from scratch every single time? Wouldn't it be great if we could just have this sort of resource where everything's already kind of built in some way, and then people can just go in and kind of grab what they need and kind of reverse engineer it and tinker with it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. In fact, I was talking to somebody that was mentioning at Avengers on the Avengers game, and we were talking about photogrammetry. That's what we were talking about, and whether or not photogrammetry was still a big part of games in the pipeline. And they're like, it's too hard to send people out there. So if you have if you're at your studio and you have a team that's multidisciplinary, environment arts does a lot. And then you send some people out to go get photographs, you do it all, and then somebody screwed up on one camera, and now and then it's all screwed up. So on Avengers, they just were using Megascans. That was it.
Yep.
So much easier.
And that's something Quixel they are just absolutely way ahead of the game in terms of the quality of the assets, in terms of the kind of places that they can go out and scan. And they've got this pipeline and infrastructure that is just it's so far ahead of the curve. For most projects, it's literally just a no-brainer, just going in and getting a Megascan subscription and just importing the stuff. And there are some steps you need to take, of course, to make it sort of game ready. But in general, I think they're moving in just the perfect direction.
That's great. And one of my students actually got hired over there at Quixel doing vegetation.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's actually a big thing, just getting the foliage side of things developed. I think that's something that's going to be really interesting to see, like all, various companies, like what they do for foliage in the future, because it's kind of like that's the really, really hard part, actually. Terrains we can kind of do, we can scan rocks, we can scan all that kind of stuff, but foliage is one of those things that just takes so much effort to manually produce, and it's a lot of, even with scans, it's just a lot of working by eye to make really any good results.
What are some of the challenges?
Yeah, so pretty much the issue is that you can scan like a tree trunk, right?
Right. Yeah.
And you'll get your tree trunk, and then it'll look reasonably good up close. And then you need to actually scan like all of the rest of the complexity of the branching structure of the tree. And that's usually something that in the past, what we would have done would just we generate that. Mm-hmm. So you're looking at it to actually produce a full tree in 3D that looks photorealistic. You're looking at something that's half procedural and half photorealistic photogrammetry.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the problem. It's that merging those two isn't something that's really been done yet in a very, in an automated way. It's
Mm-hmm.
always been sort of painstaking manual production. And that's something that's it's just slowing development down and making it really, really difficult to produce games. I think some of the best or the best examples I've seen in the industry, obviously Quixel's, very high up there, but I think Crytek's stuff is still really, really good, especially the stuff they did for Hunt with the swamps, sort of swamp biome, because they are just manually producing everything with like very, very close attention to detail and working in a sort of like a very kind of like systematic artistic way where it's like, we need to make this tree look exactly like the real thing. This is the reference. We're going to make it look like that. And it has to look like that in a modular way from all angles. So I think what those guys are doing is crazy. When I was working there, I was thinking like, man, I got so super inspired by the way that they design environments and the level of quality that they can put out. And I think still to this day, like probably some of the best foliage guys in the world are still working there, like Tom Dierberg, and those guys have got some crazy great ideas when it comes to that kind of stuff as well, and great pipeline and processing.
So it's not just SpeedTree, and SpeedTree's got a photogrammetry kind of component, but it's more than that.
Yeah, exactly. So I think they're kind of merging the two things together and trying to go for that procedural stuff, but it's still not to this point where it's just like a click of a button, and if you look at games like Hunt, where you've had this kind of manual labor put into it and just, real care and attention to detail, it's like there's still a big difference between the quality of that compared to something that's just like generated in SpeedTree, automated.
Got it. That's actually a question that I think is kind of relevant for environment artists. And there's a lot more I want to talk to you, and I want to get into your schooling and your background, and you're an entrepreneur, and I want to make sure I dive into that. But it's great for us to kind of start here, because environment arts to me is this, like it's probably the most dynamic thing going on in games right now. Animation tools are animation tools, mocap, whatever, that's whatever. Even sculpting and character work is relatively consistent. ZBrush made its waves a while back, but in environments, like there's new jobs popping up. Material artist was a job that did not exist a decade ago per se.
Yeah. Now it's substance. Yeah. Substance really changed the game there.
Yeah. And that's not a small job. I mean, that could be a 6-figure job for somebody. It can be pretty good if you work it. So the question I got is, as we go through with these tools, and people who, let's say, I'm coming a lot from the student perspective, there's this manual versus automatic approach. And in there is this question that I want to just kind of tackle right away, which is, where's the art when this becomes more automatic?
I think if you look at general shapes and composition, I usually try and get as far as I can with some sort of automated process. And then if you look at, want to take it further, you then like go into the details and see what can I now replace with like photogrammetry? What could I now replace with, is this rock really good enough? Will it hold up photorealistically? Is this grass scatter effect actually enough? Like, is it okay to have this simple blend? Can I get away with that? Or would it be better if I actually baked an entire texture into there, or found a texture that already looks good, from real life that I can kind of slap over that? And it really depends on the situation. And that's why it's so hard to program that into a computer, because as an artist, you're looking at every situation in a unique way, and you're thinking, well, what works for this situation? What makes snow look like snow? What makes desert look like desert? And grass look like grass? It's so tricky to kind of dissect the environments and dissect different parts of those environments to see just, what amount of detail you actually need. I think, though, the interesting thing is that I'm leaning more towards the scanned approach now, thinking that mainly I would try to get as far as I can using scanned assets, and then taking those scanned assets and assembling scenes with those and working that way. And that's just because you can save so much time and effort than trying to sort of procedurally generate stuff in Substance. So for individual textures and assets, I'm leaning towards more like scans. For overall terrains, however, though, I would more lean towards some sort of procedural scattering approach, simply because building all of those massive worlds, when a world gets so big, trying to do it all by hand becomes, you need every help you can get, pretty much, to place all of these rocks, to place all these trees, and have them flow with the terrain. and follow sort of erosion patterns and that kind of stuff.
That's interesting. So the process is what becomes really important. And I guess what I'm trying to get right out of the way is the whole John Henry mentality, the American story of the guy who tries to beat a railroad tie lane machine. So there's a tendency in students to feel like they need to produce everything themselves. But everybody I interview is talking about the word assemble.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that gets missed.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at what I'm trying to do with Brushify, I'm really like facing an uphill battle. And I think the only reason why I'm willing to do that is because I've had many, many years of building environments myself. So a Brushify is 100% my thing. It's not Megascans. It's not anyone else's assets. Like, this is all my stuff. And that's what I'm most proud about it, actually. It's pretty much stuff I've taken from, it's either CC0 textures that I've kind of reworked and then remade and then, or gone out and photographed myself, photogrammetry I've done myself, and then built that into some sort of coherent environment. As one person, it's really difficult to do that. And that's something that's like, well, the reward that you get for that is the ability to then be able to sell it, right? But if you're working at a studio and you just want to get an environment made, by all means, just use Megascans. I wouldn't be doing that this way unless I had a purpose. And the sort of purpose for Brushify is to kind of build onto Unreal Engine this really useful environment toolkit and means to kind of learn the engine.
That's a really good point. A way to learn the engine. And along those lines, I've been teaching environment arts for a while, but in environment arts, I mean, it's a huge world. So the first thing we do is we focus on props and then we focus on dioramas. And we're just trying to develop like what we would consider minimally viable products that make somebody a job candidate. But when we get into, yeah, exactly. Simple way to say it. What is it that an environment artist needs to know? Like from your perspective, or actually, I mean, do you see yourself as an environment artist?
Oh, I don't know, because I've worn a lot of hats over the years. And I mean, I started this I was even like 14 when I first started tinkering with 3D stuff. So it's been pretty much just my whole life doing stuff. But I started officially in the industry in 2009, working for Crytek I was a cinematic intern. So started off kind of with the job description of like, I'm going to go in and I'm going to try and make some cinematics for Crytek as an intern. And they were, of course, when I came in, they were just not expecting, that I'd be able to even do anything, because it's just like this 18-year-old kid coming down and sitting in the chair and like, oh, you're a big boy now, make a shot. But they literally threw me in the deep end and just said like, okay, you're going to be building cinematic shots for Crysis. And we're going to give you like 6 shots on like the intro to the game. And I was like, okay, it's like after a few months, I was like, oh, wow. Well, now I'm like working on Crysis 2. And it's like, it felt crazy. I couldn't believe how much responsibility they actually gave me at the time, because I could have completely messed it up. But that was it. I didn't. And I guess a lot of that's down to just pure pressure. And that's the kind of pressure that you get in a studio, right? It's like, there's a deadline. We have to work our asses off for the next 6 weeks, and we have to make that deadline, and we have to make sure that what ends up on that disc that gets shipped, that EA approves, it makes it past submission. And it's pretty much do or die at that point, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, and cinematics is one of those fields where there are just so many different parts of that job, because you've got sort of like the set dressing aspect where you're building environments, and then you're trying to film those. So all the stuff that goes into set dressing, and then you got the lighting, and then you got the camera, and then you got the post-production, post-processing, color grading, editing. And in some cases, you're even doing like sort of previs, or, what we would call it pitch viz, where, you want to show something to a director and say like, hey, this is something I've got, it's a cool idea. And you want to make a movie in like 2 or 3 days. And then you've got to do all the audio yourself and all the editing. And then you present it to the director or producer or whatever. And he says, this is what we want, or it's not what we want, whatever. Or I want it like this, but with, more dragons or something,
More dragonness, please. More dragonness.
I like what dragons it is.
Yes, love it.
More swords.
I love that pitch viz.
Yeah.
So 18, your first job.
That's it was crazy.
Amazing. Yeah.
I had to move country as well. It was really annoying.
What? At 18?
Yeah. I was in Sheffield. That's where I grew up. It's my hometown. And then moved to Frankfurt. And I pretty much just got like, I think the word is shanghaied here, where you just stay in a country forever and then you can't get out. But yeah, pretty much lost in Germany now. So I don't know if I'll move anytime soon, but yeah, we'll see.
What were your parents thinking?
Well, they thought I was crazy until I actually got the job offer. Then they were like, "Oh, it's actually the best thing he can do." Because the problem I had is I wasn't really that great academically and stuff. My grades were pretty abysmal at the end because I was spending all of my time working on 3D stuff up until 5 in the morning every night, and they couldn't get me off the computer. And my mom would just come in and she'd just yell at me. She'd be like, "Joe, this is crazy. You're wasting your life. You're like a zombie attached to the computer." So it kind of worked out in the end, but those were some rough years, actually. Not great. I wouldn't say it would be a great idea to go that obsessive into it. And I don't actually understand why I did that, because I had a lot of I didn't have a backup plan or something, you know? There was no it's going to be okay in the end. It was like I actually didn't have a clue what I was going to do. So luckily when Crytek kind of offered an internship and said we like the stuff you did on the forums, it was like a lifeline, actually.
What do you think you'd be doing if that didn't happen? You think about that?
I'd be Mercenary or something.
3D Mercenary?
No, a real one that kills people.
Oh, great. Great.
No. I don't know what I'd do. I like journalism, but that's it. You have to actually be able to, do stuff in the real world.
There's a couple of things here, because I don't think you're alone in that story, either in my students, the people I know, and then, it's my nephew's going through that as well. They cannot get him off that computer.
Yeah.
And my brother was like, I think they actually, there was a lot of drama. Anyways, he's now staying at his mom's, and his dad and, my brother was like, this guy, I don't understand him. He's got no work ethic. He's got none of this stuff. And then he comes and he stays with me for a week on his way to his mom. And I'm like, no work ethic? What the hell are you guys talking about? This guy works 10 to 12 hours a day. It's just, you don't understand the work he's doing.
Yeah. This is it. It's a whole new field, right? It's difficult for people to understand, and my parents didn't understand it. They just saw it as oh, he's playing the video games again. And it was only until I sort of showed them the artwork, showed them the videos, and then they still didn't really get it. They looked at the stuff and they were like, "Oh, very good." It's we'll frame that for you, awesome, well done, little Joe. But they didn't get that it's actually something cool that could be in some way commercially viable or could lead to a job.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's just a different mentality, different way of thinking.
So what's going through your mind when your mom's yelling at you? Your dad's probably expressing some form of disappointment. My dad expressed some form of disappointment in my choices as an artist. What's going through your mind that keeps you on this? Are you just in full-on mercenary rebel mode, or what's going on?
See, that's the crazy thing is I don't really remember, but I remember the situation was so bad, but I don't remember why. I guess I just had this single-mindedness that was just this pure single-mindedness that there was no other way that I wanted to go through life. When you actually think about making a decision, there is decisions in life that I sort of ponder over, the big ones, do I like this girl? Do I not like her? Am I doing this or am I doing that? Am I going to change jobs? Am I quit jobs? Am I going to start a business? Am I going to actually do this? Because it's really tough. And those are big decisions that you want to make. But the weird thing is that I think that those decisions are getting bigger and bigger the older I get, and I'm finding them harder to make. Whereas when I was young, I found them relatively easy to make. It was almost like I didn't have a care in the world. And I think that's because I was young. I almost didn't have anything to lose. I didn't have anything to lose, because what else is there when you're that age? You don't even understand or have a concept of time. You don't understand how years pass because you haven't had many years yet. And I think once you get older, it's sort of you've got this you start thinking, there's all these things that you can lose. It's your reputation, your money, your, all of these things, your relationships. And then that it can stagnate you, actually.
Tell me about that, actually. I had a similar experience myself because I got super lucky. I got a great job right out of going to school. I worked for Pixelogic. Pixelogic became this huge company. They did what Substance is doing now. They did 10 years ago. Crazy. In terms of revolutionize things. But it got to a point where it was I can't put anything online because anything I put online is just an opportunity to take me down. Does that make sense? It's an opportunity to not live up to the expectation.
So it's you were kind of worried about the high bar that you set for yourself. I had this,
Yeah, and I had this this persona now, because at Pixelogic they'd crafted this persona of Ryan, and it's like now you, Joe, you have Brushify. So can you just post work online? Do you have to be careful? Do you have to rethink? Does the inner critic come out?
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess the problem is that if you get this fear factor of like, oh, what if this artwork isn't good enough and everybody's going to comment and they're all going to say it's bad and it's like you should do this and you should do that. But it's like, well, I'd rather post something and then people just say, oh, this isn't very good and, give me the feedback than have the fear of posting it at all. And I know that it's, my artwork's not perfect. I don't think anyone can say this is a perfect piece of work or something like that. And I know that some artwork's going to be more perfect than others. The stuff that I did for Rebirth, of course, it's going to look better probably than some of the screenshots I'm building for Brushify. And that's because there's just way more time and effort that's gone into these individual shots to make them look so much better, right? They're all using cutting edge photogrammetry. They're, the tools that we're using there are just, really just way more time and effort. All the stuff that generated in Houdini. And yeah, it's leagues different. But at the same time, it's like, well, it's a slightly different purpose, One is a pack that people want to buy to sort of learn Unreal Engine and get a feel for how it works and, maybe build some MMO game in real time or action game or first person shooter or RPG, something like that. And then the other is more like a very, very, very high end sort of film project almost, cinematic film project that's kind of like pushing the engine to its boundaries. And it's different things really.
How did Rebirth get started? How did they approach you with this idea or?
Yeah, so they pretty much came with like this crazy. It started off like it was like an email from Teddy, the CEO, and Teddy's amazing. He's one of these sort of visionary people that you just when they describe something, it's like, wow, okay, this is gonna be good. Whatever happens, whatever ends up being the result of this project, this is gonna be good. And it starts off like this crazy email where it's just like, we're gonna build all of Iceland. And I'm just there like, okay, like we're going to procedurally create the entire of Iceland. And I'm like, oh my God, okay. I just thought, let's just do it, got stuck in. Of course, the scope, massively gets lowered, as the project goes. But in terms of what we achieved, I think it's sort of, it's still one of those mind-blowing things. Even if you can take a very small, it's kind of cross-section of a realistic scene and, kind of perfectly showcase that. That was kind of what it ended up being in the end.
Did you know Teddy from before, or was that just
no? That was the first time talking with him. I think that was in September last year.
So that makes me think of something because Crytek reaches out to you, Teddy's reaching out to you. What do you do that helps attract people to you?
I guess back in the very old days, in 2008, 2007, 2008, there was a forum called CryMod, which was basically the cry modding forum for. It was like a modding forum for CryEngine. So for Far Cry and for Crysis, they had that kind of CryMod website. And I was like a teenager still, just posted the work on there, and then I joined a modding team. And that was what I was spending all my nights doing, at 5 a.m., whatever, basically making my parents really annoyed at me. And but that was the good thing, was that once you got onto a modding team, of course, they maybe have a bunch of assets. So they had some characters built, they had some environment pieces built. And so back then I wasn't really like a great 3D artist that could build all these environment, assets myself. So what I was doing was just like assembling scenes, making trying to make really nice screenshots and then posting them up on the forums. And that was really the thing. It was like, I kind of got known as the screenshot guy. So being the sort of screenshot dude was something that people like, it's like, wow, these are some nice shots here. Maybe he has some talent for doing some cinematics or something. And that kind of got me my foot in the door that first time. Yeah, and then I guess I've just always kind of stuck with that method of just kind of create some promotional pieces that I think are the ones that kind of look nice, and then kind of just making sure that they have some visibility. And I guess that's down to a bit like consistently posting stuff.
Yeah.
Even if it's not the most amazing,
Got it. Where do you post?
I'm always posting to ArtStation, but that's more of a recent thing. So back in the day, it was more like forums. And then for actually about, I guess, 5 years or so, I wasn't posting that much online. And I was kind of just focused on working at Crytek and building some knowledge, working on the projects there. And I think that's interesting because it's a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, you learn so much from working with people at a game studio, especially somewhere like Crytek where the focus is all like, it's all on super high-end CG. It's super high-end 3D graphics. And like the guys who've been doing that have been, basically just like spending their entire lives perfecting photorealism since like Crysis 1, where, it was like one of the first games where people were like, wow, we're getting there. 3D graphics might actually be, in real time, we might actually be able to achieve photorealism in a game. And I think if you look at games nowadays, they still kind of, they've improved a little bit, but I still think like that Crysis 1 level is still like a quality bar that kind of like goes in history.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, spending sort of 5 years with those guys, looking at all the projects they were doing, working on and off with them, because I was in the cinematic team, I was kind of able to like dip in and out of different projects and, see like when the new techniques were coming in and how different people were working and that kind of stuff.
The future of real time, like you guys have pushed it. And as you're talking, it makes me think about something, because you were saying how Crysis 2 is kind of the, is a benchmark for realism.
Yeah, I'd say like Crysis 1 more than Crysis 2 or 3.
Okay.
I think, I'd like to say like, oh, the Crysis games I worked on were the best ones, but in my opinion, it was still the first one was the best one. And I think it looked the best and it was the benchmark. The sequels were, I don't want to go crazy with like, hating on them or something, but like, I still don't think that they sort of matched up to the original exactly. But, there's a lot of like different opinions about that, right?
Sure. But as the technology gets older and as new things come up, work gets better, right? Like there was this thread some of my students were bringing up about somebody had asked online, for everybody to post their junior level work. Those who have a job, post your junior. And then there was a bunch of seniors in there, guys that have been in the industry 10 years going like, that's your freaking junior work. Like, this is pretty damn good work for junior. And then everybody's like, oh my God, this is the level and all of that. And so my students got worried. And I was just like, guys, remember, it's not like, people are just drinking better Kool-Aid. The tools are better.
Yeah. That's the thing as well. You can just go onto Megascans and you can download a photorealistic rock and you can take a screenshot of it and you'd be like, I'm an environment artist, but it's not, it's like, yeah, technically, and I'm the least person that could say that because that's literally what I've been doing for the last 8 months. But there's a certain level of quality that you can push it really, really far and achieve photorealism, and you still need to have the eye for it. You still need to understand what you're doing. You still need to understand lighting and composition, and you still need to be able to balance the lighting in a way. But it's true that you can, of course, be a kind of amateur and you can grab, some really high-end assets and you can take screenshots of them and they'll look pretty good. And you might even fool some people into thinking you're this incredible artist. And that, for me, that's a bit where the like, the imposter syndrome comes in, because I'm like, okay, I didn't build this rock. It was made by nature and, the thousands of processing hours and dedication and massive team effort that has built Quixel's incredible pipeline, and kudos to them. That's the thing, is they've done pretty much like the hard work so that we don't have to, which is great.
So what do we do? What's the job now? If somebody's coming in, let's say, imagine they're an environment artist, they're starting today. If they're an environment artist, they were starting 5 years ago, it was clear. You make assets. It's just you're not making a character, right? You're making, what is it somebody once said to me? You make everything that's not a character I made. Is the way they define the environment artist. And I was like, okay, I get that. 5 years ago, you made everything. Today, they've got talks in GDC now where they're like, no, we don't make things. We just go to Megascan. So what does an environment artist do? And how do I position myself? I don't want to do character. I don't want to do VFX. I love environment. What do I focus on now?
I think there are two things that are really important. The first would be your core art skills and that stuff: composition, lighting, set dressing, understanding how to look at a reference and copy it. So that's like the art side of things, because that's the side that a computer right now, at least for now, hasn't been able to replace. Scanning can't replace it. We haven't developed AI sophisticated enough to do all that stuff for us. So that stuff is pretty much protected in terms of it's a job. The second thing would be having some sort of business goal or idea. And it means like having an actual goal or a vision for how you see somebody using a product and using that in the future. So my thing with Brushify is just to have this goal of creating all of these different biomes and having a sort of tutorial system and learning system, an easy way for people to get into Unreal Engine, a place where all of the stuff, all the materials, all the shaders, all that stuff you don't want to have to do when you first download the engine is already done for you. And it's literally just something like, you buy it from the store and you click add to project and it's all set up. And I think not many there are some asset companies on Marketplace, but there aren't that many that are just kind of like this holistic product where everything's kind of it's all using the same material infrastructure, and it's pretty reliable and robust. So that's been kind of like what I see as my goal in the future, is like working towards that path and making it so that, yeah, you can build stuff faster.
And that makes me think of like one of the things that they say. I've done a lot of business classes research. I've been, doing this for about 12 years now, 10 years. And one of the things they say is if you're going to have a business and you don't want to be poor and you want to be able to help it grow, you got to be valuable. You just got to make sure that you're putting value out there. And that's kind of where this question's going in my mind. So I'm glad you answered like that, because the big thing with my students is, I try to get them out of the artiste hat. I agree they have to have core skills, but I want to also activate the entrepreneur in them. How can they be valuable to the industry? Because you could spend decades trying to be an artiste and master everything and all that stuff, and then the freaking software changes and you got to update all that stuff again.
Yeah, and then some punk comes along and he's done everything with megascans, and you've been spending all your time trying to build it all in Substance Designer, and it's like, I've made this photorealistic pebble, procedural pebble tiling, in Substance Designer, and you spend like 5 years on it and it looks perfect in photoreal, and then some kid just comes along with the scan and he's like, I did that in 5 minutes.
And you've got terrible. That email. You've got that email, I think, right? No. That is great.
Yeah. But it is what it is, right?
Yes. So where do we focus now? Because you bridge both of those worlds. You've used the scans, you've built your own system, you're familiar with substance process. So where do we focus? That's, I guess, I'm still driving to that. There's two things I got from what you said is, one, have a vision for really adding value to a company, like looking at Unreal and Brushify is an example. You're diving in and you're doing something that you think is going to help people. So that's definitely going to drive attention to you. People are going to be offering jobs, or it's going to be much better than just, hey, here's my ArtStation portfolio. So there's that. What else do we need to focus on? What can somebody who's maybe, because you've been in this industry for about a decade, I think you said now.
I mean, it's also that kind of problem that I think game engines have, which is that there are so many 3D artists out there and they're doing offline rendering. And then if you look at game engines, I think it's almost like this weird, like everyone sees them as like an enigma. It's like, oh, it's real time. Oh, it's complicated, And the problem is that they're right. It actually is stupidly complicated. And that's because stuff isn't set up for them. I was blown away by how it's like when you download Unreal, there are, not to hate on Epic or anything. I think they do some great stuff, but like some of their example stuff isn't always the best. They have some interesting stuff, like the kite demo is great, but there's not that much of it actually. And that's something that's like, it's a bit overwhelming to newcomers when they see the shader graph and they're like, well, how do I build my own materials? And then you kind of, find a few different material tutorials online, and it's like, oh, you mean I have to actually I just want to render this chair, I don't want to have to be like a math genius, just to plug some textures into this chair and have it render in, with a roughness map or something.
Set up your scalars, your multipliers, make sure you get sRGB.
And then you start looking into landscapes and terrains, and it's like, I want to build an auto material, but I've got all these different maps to route through, and I've got to worry about the slope, and I've got to route the normal maps in. I've got to worry about how do I get the height maps through for tessellation. It just gets ridiculous, and I was like, why isn't that out of the box just built in? And then you dig deeper and you find that some of the functions built into the engine are just kind of I don't know what happened, but it looks like complete spaghetti. They didn't really spend too much time commenting all of these built-in shaders and stuff. For things like if you go and look at Unreal Engine Parallax one, the official Parallax function, and it's like, I don't understand it, man. I have no idea what's going on there. It's just too complicated. And I could just imagine if you were a newcomer, the level of difficulty, the curve, it's not a curve, it's a brick wall. This is the problem that we face with real time. So yeah, finding ways to make it easier for people and doing that through example scenes, tutorials, very clear and concise. And the problem is as well, there are tutorials out there. The problem is that the quality bar for tutorials, I think, is really also pretty low in the industry. You'll usually get, it's some guy and he's got a crappy microphone and it's a bit like, and now you click on this and you click on that. And it's just like, you don't really, it needs to get to the point. I've been so just frustrated just by like, I click, 5 minutes into the tutorial, he's still not talking about the part that I need to know about where he actually clicks the thing. I think that's something that needs to, that I could kind of like help to raise the bar a little bit and build some more concise, sort of really clear tutorials with a lot of, good presentation. And that's something I think is super important. So, yeah.
I think you did that with Rebirth tutorial. That was probably one of the best tutorials I've seen on this.
The problem with that one though is I spent way too long. So I think almost like I got to this obsession point where I kind of almost built into like a documentary, So I was like, I probably can't hit that quality bar every single time because it's just the amount of editing that goes into it, the amount of work. It's like you're seeing it 45 minutes, but it's like I'm condensing months of work into 45 minutes. And it's like, and because it's got to still be, I can't go 2 hours, I can't go 3 hours. I've got to at some point cut it down and make it something someone could watch in one sitting without, having all of this pointless fluff that they get bored and they, want to do something else.
And you're switching the screen it looks like almost every 30 seconds, you're switching the screen.
Exactly. So it's like I'm, crossfading and fading into different parts to show, this is the shader, this is kind of what it does. A lot of the shader stuff that I'm showing in that stuff is the shaders that come with Brushify. We just basically tweaked them a little bit. We moved them around and changed a lot of the settings and flipped a few nodes here and there.
I love this part of the conversation too, because one of my friends, Majid, he just posted this Wolverine sculpt online and is rendered in Arnold. And I'm looking at this thing and I'm like, oh my God, this is just so beautiful. I'm seeing so much beautiful work being done out of Arnold. And then one of my students is he was doing some X-Gen, so he was in Arnold anyways. And he posts this and I'm like, that's it. That's the skin. I didn't realize it was Arnold. I'm like, because we've been back and forth. How do you get the skin in Marmoset for him? That's the skin. And he's like, oh, that's Arnold. I'm like, oh my God.
Oh, you thought it was Unreal? Or
I was hoping it was Marmoset, because we've been working for a while on him getting the specularity, the roughness or whatever, right? Because that's what really makes a difference.
And that's the problem. It's like trying to get that stuff in real time. It's still not quite there yet. So like with Rebirth, I mean, to be honest, I think it was impressive, but at the same time, we picked our battles extremely well. We went with this very evenly lit, very, we were rendering pretty much rocks and then a few bits of grass here and there. It was, and difficult things were obviously like the background mountains, which need, generation. And we used this sort of LiDAR combined with Houdini to kind of generate those and look reasonably realistic. But for the most part, all of that stuff you don't have to worry too much about like the roughness of the SSS, all that stuff that's complicated about rendering skin. We didn't have to do any of that stuff. So yeah, we picked our battles very, very well for this one. And I think that also helps a lot.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, actually. So what do you think is the future of real time? Since you're kind of at the edge pushing that, where do you think we're getting there where it's Arnold level quality, or do you see that happening?
I have absolutely no doubt that in the next 5 years, we're going to see some insanely mind-blowing stuff. It's going to be beyond, I think I don't think we can even imagine what we're going to see in even like 3 years. Because I think what happens every sort of GDC is, a company like Quixel will kind of like throw the gauntlet down. Also, I guess you watched also the Goodbye Kansas demo as well with the Alicia Vikander with in the lake or next to the lake and stuff. I think it was called the Troll demo.
But that one I don't know. Goodbye Kansas.
It's like Goodbye Kansas Troll. Yeah, that's it. And this was the other demo that sort of came out at the same time as Rebirth at GDC. And was kind of, I think the two were really complementary to each other, because it was like the stuff we did at Quixel was like this environment showcase. And then this was more like it's still got a great environment, of course, but like the characters is really the focus and everything.
Yeah.
And that's in Unreal. But yeah, I mean, the skin is really good, but it's still not there yet. It's still a bit like there's something wrong. And, it's at that point where you can put like 100 people on it and they all think they know what is wrong, and then they change it, and then it's like, no, it's not that. It's something else. It's just, it's very tricky because you can pause a frame and you can start thinking like, oh well, it's the it's where the hair meets the, it's where the hair is at the hairline, it's too hard, it's too like whatever. We need to soften that here. And then you soften it and it's like, oh, but now she looks like she's going bald. It's like, I don't get it. It's like, this doesn't make sense. Or it's her eyes. It must be the, something with the wetness of the eyelids. Yeah, and it becomes like this completely bottomless pit, basically, to try to get a character to look real. But I do think that like every time a demo like this comes out, it's almost like a gauntlet being thrown down, and everyone goes, "Oh wow, so that's possible. We've got to beat that next year." And
there's a studio. The president lives up here with where I'm on top of the world, and they're hiring 40 people by the end of this year. And which we hear a lot about games, and there's a lot of hiring, firing, and there's all stuff. Yeah. But I mean, this studio, 40 people they're hiring by the end of the year. And one of the biggest jobs they need to fill right now is rendering. And when he said rendering, I was like, what? What do you mean by? I was like, what do you mean by rendering? Because usually that's what people say when it's like offline. That's what I imagine Pixar to say. Yeah, we have a whole rendering department. And then he was explaining, the whole idea, because ultimately real time is really just there's deferred rendering elements inside real time and all of that. And that's their next battleground. Is rendering and making things beautiful. So maybe they heard the gauntlet.
Yeah. I mean, and it makes total sense from a business standpoint, because you have these movies that are basically, trying to churn out blockbusters. They're trying to do it cheaply. They've got render times that are just too long. They want to reduce their render times. If they can do it real time, even better. If the tools to do things in real time become better and more, it's just easier now to like import a rock into Unreal and then set up a nice camera and some nice lighting, and wow, that looks like a photo. Wow, that looks like it could be from DSLR. Like maybe I took that last week when I was in Iceland, right? It's like this incredible new thing where it's like, wow, it's not even difficult anymore to render these shots in real time. And once it gets easier and easier and easier, and it's working in real time becomes just like putting stuff together in 3D Studio Max and hitting render with a V-Ray or Mental Ray or in Arnold. That once it becomes that level of quality with that much ease, it will happen for sure. And just because money is a driving factor, and time or time saving, time is money, so it's a time saving method.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, the execs I was talking to, it's like sometimes these games, it's $300 million to make a game.
Oh yeah. Well, that's also the thing, is reducing costs of video game development. That's also just, thinking about the amount of time that people spend just building their own shaders in Unreal. So one of the first projects, like after I left Crytek, I was like 2 years ago or a year and a half ago or so, I worked on an MMO for a bit, it's called Outlaws of the Old West. And it was basically like it was like a survival MMO. And they had this kind of infrastructure. Well, I kind of was brought into the team, and they'd been working on it for 6 months or so already. And to be honest, they just hadn't really made much progress, because when it came to actually like doing the environment, they didn't really have any sort of shaders in place. It was like they needed to build all that stuff from scratch. And, that's before I had Brushify, before I built all that stuff. So it was really just like, I was looking at all of the different stuff on Unreal Marketplace, and I was like, I can't use that. Maybe I can take a bit of that and kind of move that. But it's like, well, in the end, I had to just build it all from scratch myself, because it was just like, there was just no way we could use what was already in there. And that was pretty much like my realization. It's like, wow, there's a bit of a niche here to build something standard.
That makes sense. It had to all get thrown out, huh? So that's, weeks of.
I spent about, as I say, $400 or $500 on all of the different, maybe even like 2,000. I think I spent I bought every single landscape order material on the marketplace when I was trying to do that project. And I was like, I just couldn't find one that was optimized, that looked good, that did all of these things that I wanted it to do for this MMO game, and I was just like, wow, I can't believe this doesn't exist. How come no one's built this? And it's like, back then I wasn't such an expert with shader graph, so it was a bit like, I couldn't just go and I'll just quit this job and do it myself. I wasn't really in that mindset. It was like, during the development of the game, when I was constantly realizing we're running into wall after wall trying to use these landscape order materials that just aren't really game ready. They're not development ready. And that's the thing, is every single MMO team working on Unreal Engine 4, every single open world game, every single first person shooter RPG. And this is the thing. If you look at the Steam top 100 charts, how many of those are Unreal Engine 4 games. This is a lot of games companies, a lot of indie developers out there that are basically running up against the same wall, which is, they don't know how to get their infrastructure together, their shaders, their assets, how to import assets, like a proper pipeline for Unreal Engine 4 that's going to work and that's going to give them 60 FPS, 100 FPS in the end. Because it's hard. It's just really difficult. So making it easy is crucial.
I think the great thing in what I'm hearing, because if we kind of circle around to one of the questions that started this was, what does somebody need to focus on? And what I hear from you is a big part of you is just having a mission and being really helpful. Does that resonate with you, like in how you see yourself?
I guess it's a bit like I don't know about whether I would quote Jeff Bezos or not, but I'm pretty sure he said something about this, like, where you try and basically you become like something like become a missionary, not a mercenary, or something like that, right? Kind of thing he would say. But something like where you go on a mission, and then it's like, because you have a mission and you approach capitalism from that direction, rather than thinking like, I just want to take my money and I'm always at the bottom and everyone hates me and I have to pay my taxes and it's horrible. If you get lost in that mindset, it's a bit like, you can see that, okay, I'm only looking at the negative aspects of capitalism or the monetary system, right? But there are positive aspects, and I think very few people sort of like actually talk about those and actually embrace them. And I think that's kind of the thing of where I came from, is I don't really have a choice, I had to kind of just embrace it because this is it, At a certain point, I was a kind of idealistic kid thinking like, wouldn't it be great to change this system because it sucks, and I'm an artist and I just want to do my art stuff and I don't want anything to do with these business people, the stupid men in suits, But I think as I've gotten older, I've kind of realized, like, if you can't beat them, you've got to join them. And then you've got to kind of do it in a way that's not detrimental to other people in the world, right? You've got to do it in a way that's going to help people. And that was the interesting kind of revelation I had when I was maybe, it took me a while because I don't know, maybe I'm a bit slow or whatever. I think some like 18-year-olds just get it straight away and they're like, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. And then they just do it, But it took me until I was like 25 before I was like, just completely realizing that this is, having a different approach to capitalism is a better way of kind of organizing my life, and seeing the good that it can do. Because that's I think the biggest misunderstanding is that if you help somebody else in a monetary system, you will get rewarded. It will happen eventually. It's sort of like there is a sort of karma there. There is a sort of like bounce back. And that's also the thing, that it's like, in order to survive in the capitalist system, is that I need to help somebody else. Otherwise, I will die. I'll literally starve, right? As an artist, I can't just be here like making whatever I want. I need to make something that's useful or valuable to somebody else. And then I'm going to find a way to somehow bring the value back to myself. But it's the first step that needs to take place first.
I love that. That's great. I think that's going to live with me for a while, that idea of the missionary versus mercenary. Both are achieving some goal. But when you think, missionaries, there's a defense element, there's a mercenary element to missionaries, but they have a goal, they have a mission that they're accomplishing. It's for a specific good.
Yeah, for sure. There's all kinds of these like little mantras, right? You see them all the time on LinkedIn, but they all have like a, kind of like a ring of truth about them, It's like, and I think it boils down to this thing of like, if you want to be a knight, act like a knight, right? If you want to be somebody that goes out and does something and does it well, and then brings that value or that discovery back to the masses, then just try and go ahead and do that thing, right? And whether that's, whatever field you're in, right? If you're in ice skating, become a great ice skater, and then you go and teach ice skating, and then you're bringing it back to the community. But it's pretty much the same thing with 3D, right? It's that you do it enough for a long time, and then you think to yourself, okay, I would like to build some kind of infrastructure, some kind of tutorial, some kind of way of providing some value back to people. And it kind of goes back in full circle. And then I'm thinking it's like, well, it's like, it's kind of like this example of the monomyth, right? Like the archetypical story where somebody goes, it becomes a hero, brings back to the community, and I think that's what life is, right? It's like this circle of just going off and doing the same hero's journey again and again and again. Maybe I'm really into environment art right now, but maybe in like 5-10 years, I'll find myself a different passion and I'll decide to do that instead, because why not start a new adventure?
Totally. I love that. That's great. Was it scary when you started Brushify, or were you working like when you made that entrepreneur step? Tell me.
Yeah, I guess that all of them were a bit scary, but that was pretty. I was very settled at Crytek. I had
Mhm.
got very knowledgeable with the CryEngine, very comfortable with the CryEngine, and I had thought to myself, just like there was a nagging sort of feeling in the back of my head that was like, do I have transferable skills? And I was always thinking to myself, like, oh God, what if I don't? What if I only can work at Crytek forever? And I was almost there for like I was there for like 9 years or 8 years, and almost 9 years, and yeah, just absolutely still didn't believe in myself to this point that I had some transferable skills that could move to another engine or could move to offline rendering or anything like that. So I guess this last couple of years has been just kind of proving to myself that yes, I have some skills. They can work in not just CryEngine, not just one company. They can be used, by everybody in the industry and kind of utilized. So I think it's been really good to have like that kind of recognition and stuff. It's been a
That's
great feeling.
Yeah, but it was scary.
Oh yeah. Well, and also it was my first time freelancing as well. So, doing your taxes and and your health insurance and just all of the bureaucracy. Germany's just crazy,
Oh man, I've heard specifically of Germany.
They don't stop with the bureaucracy. It's like every 5 days I'm gonna like do something new with signing something or like, sign it 5 times and then send it off to like carry a pigeon to the tax office. And I don't know. They haven't invented like email in Germany. That doesn't exist. So everything has to be done by like you have to send like a rodent with like attached to its leg or something. It's ridiculous.
All right, guys, get some work. Anybody have some work that they want to get Joe's eyes on? Joe, I think you said you were cool looking at some work, right?
Yeah, for sure. No, that's cool.
Let's see.
I'm not going to be like a Gordon Ramsay or anything, so don't worry.
Joe, you can see my screen, right?
Yep. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's start here. This is a couple of days old, and this doesn't give you the whole scheme of things. This is actually a big, massive environment where I'm going to, as a company, we're going to gather some people and we're going to build this. Not build this. We're going to kind of build it out to an experience. But Ray's already built the whole thing. So we can start here. And one of the things that I like to do when we're looking at the work is there something that triggers you? And I mean, triggers you to say, this person's more of an amateur or this person is not ready for a job? And is there anything that triggers you that says, yeah, you got a chance, you can do this?
I mean, I think it's absolutely promising. Like it's really promising work. And yeah, so first step is like, it's not like, I can tell this is somebody that's pretty much, they understand the 3D tools, they get their tools, they totally understand modeling. I think what's missing is a bit more attention to detail. And I think it's more like it's like focusing on reference more than anything. So like I guess this is like the plinth thing. I just focus on the plinth thing for a second, because this thing on the right, I don't know if it's a plinth or what exactly it is.
You're talking about this, right?
This kind of bronze thing. So I mean, the thing that makes me think a bit like that the modeling isn't being done by a super senior level guy, it's overuse of chamfering. It's very soft. And in real life, I don't see that. Like I don't ever see those kind of soft edges. There's a roughness map, and the roughness map looks, I think it's okay, but I think it's a bit lower res, or it's somehow slightly blurry. It's not giving kind of like, or picking up kind of like sharp detail. So I would say maybe switch out for a different roughness map and maybe tile it more. And then chamfering, I would kind of like sharpen up the chamfers a bit. But then, I'm saying all that, but then it could be that like you're looking at a reference and the reference actually looks like that. And then it's like, oh, well, I'm just full of shit, But yeah, I really think like it probably doesn't in real life. So and that's also the thing, is it also depends on, is there a reference for this kind of stuff? And that's just to the case of like, if you're trying to really get this one object and make it look like a real object that was like a real thing that actually exists in the real world, if that was your goal, yeah, I think that the chamfering is what's killing it, maybe.
Okay, got it. That's great. All right, here's another scene. And it sounds like that feedback would also apply here to
it's a lot of just like, I think overuse of chamfering. There needs to be a few harder, sharper lines at some point in the image, because it feels like everything's rounded. And I know that's like, I think it looks pretty in a way, like I can get where you're coming from aesthetically, like to round everything and smooth everything, but something about it feels like there needs to be just a couple of assets in there that are a bit sharp.
Cool.
Maybe like the rails of the kind of corridor, like these rails that are going along the sides of the corridor. It's kind of hard without being up to point, but yeah. Yeah, but these kind of rails that, are past the corridor, and maybe like if you would do something else like with like the edge of the frames of the paintings, that would also help. The floor texture is the same thing. I think the same thing as that roughness map before. I think the problem is just like the texture is a little bit bigger. Like it needs to have some smaller, it needs either more tiled, but of course you want to either use a higher resolution texture so it's not going to show the tiling too much, or it needs to like somehow have some more detail, because right now it feels like the scale feels off because the marble texture is so large scale, if you get what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
And from a lighting perspective, I think the lighting's really good. The only thing that's weird, I think, is that the contact on the AO, it feels a bit like floaty in places, especially like where the plinth joins with the side of the corridor. You see there's like a hard edge there, and it feels a bit like there should be some sort of, further down at the very base, like this one, right? You see where the kind of skirting board hits with the plinth? Yeah, like there. You can really see then that there's not really much contact shadow going with the AO, whereas like the rest of it, you can see there's kind of this bouncy AO going on. And it's probably like, I don't know if it's in-engine AO or if it's ray traced or what, but for some reason there's not like a little contact shadow there. If you could get that contact shadow, it would help it a lot, I think, to feel more embedded, like it's part of the scene.
Now, that attention to detail, I think, is really an important thing to kind of stop and pause on for a second, because there's so much that we have to do, right? And Ray's like working his butt off. You know how much work this kind of stuff is.
It's a ton of work.
Yeah, but it's these attention to detail things that tend to separate, and they can be the difference between getting a job and not getting a job, right?
Yeah, I guess
how
it's
important should somebody prioritize that is what I'm getting at.
It depends if it's. I'm not going to say that you need to be this kind of like ultra pedantic, like every little detail. Like you shouldn't be the Stanley Kubrick kind of guy that, I'm going to remake this whole thing, screw that, don't do it, because it's better to keep iterating and like just move on to a different artwork, and then the next one will be better, and then the next one will be better. And I myself, I'm not an expert on hard surface stuff. I've done some hard surface stuff, but corridor scenes like this, they're not my forte either. So I'm not like, I can say a few things, but maybe I don't know what I'm talking about, But then if I would look at, I guess it's also down to like an art style perspective as well. So obviously this is more like, it's a BioShock style, right? It's more, it's a bit of a stylization. It's not aiming to be 100% photorealistic. And that's kind of like the problem when it comes to like, with game art styles. It's like, you've got to already have like an art director at the very beginning. When you're an artist, the art director will come up with like an entire mood for the game, like mood boards. He'll come up with like, this is how every single asset needs to look. It has to have this grittiness to it, or every asset has to have this roundness to it. You'll get like a guy, like someone from Disney, like Chris Sanders, the director at Disney, Lilo and Stitch director, and How to Train Your Dragon director, that guy. And he'll basically have like a style guide where he says just like every asset has to be round. Everything needs to be like, even the particle effects have to be rounded. And have this distinctive pattern to them. And it's like this incredible insight that at the very beginning of the project is already established, right? Mm-hmm. So then all the other artists fall in line. The problem is when you do a personal piece like this, you're kind of aping off of BioShock's art style, right? But I think the problem is that you don't have the kind of style guides and the kind of resources that the BioShock team themselves had when they built this game. They will have had actually like very concise style guides, very, very concise mood boards, and dissecting all of the assets, and how you should be creating them. And they will have an art director that knows those style guides inside and out, coming to every single individual environment artist and saying, nope, this is not how it's supposed to be. You should make it more like this. We've got to push it more in this direction. And that's like this months long process of building a game. The thing with an artwork like this is when I see this, even though, you got this far without having all of that stuff and without having all that direction. So when I see this, I think like, this is somebody that knows the tools, who has put the work in, he's put the time in, and it's like, obviously I can shape this person in a certain direction.
Mm-hmm.
So because you've already done this, there's way more likelihood of you're going to get hired than if you just didn't do anything at all, or if you did something and you kind of half-assed it. So I think like with a scene like this, maybe you just need to put like a few little details in there, but the overall thing is already a great accomplishment. So
Awesome. All right. Now, okay, so one of the things that Johan is battling, this is in progress and still in development here, is lighting. He's just doing a ton to get the lighting to behave the way that he wants, dealing with the attenuation radius, getting the blowout and all of that kind of stuff. So in this particular case, we could talk about what triggers, but I'm not quite like Johan and I and Simon are working more and more. More than anything, can you give some pointers or some thoughts on how he can develop this lighting system?
I think in terms of like finding a reference, maybe looking at some of the Pixar stuff, or I think there was a scene recently from one of the guys at Quixel, Victor Oman, that he did a scene that was very similar and maybe a really good inspiration. Let's see if I can find. Oh, it's Victor with a W. If you find his ArtStation, there's a scene that's really he did recently where it's kind of like it's the mech pirate cabin on ArtStation. But he nailed this look of there being something in the air, like there being a slight foggy dust in the air in an interior scene, and nailed the sort of colors. And I think he set the scene up in Unreal as well, so it's pretty crazy. Like it's using the ray tracing. Yeah, the ray tracing and stuff. So, I mean, that's also the thing, right? Ape off of other artists. I know it sounds really bad, but it's like, I would say that that's how you will grow, right? It's just copying first. Before you try and do everything from scratch yourself, try and see someone else's work that you see is like super inspiring, and then just try and copy it. So I don't know if this is the direction that you would want to go with the lighting. Maybe you had a different direction in mind. But when I think of like an interior scene at like a desk, and I think about the recent examples of things that I saw in the last few months that caught my attention, and I thought, wow, this is, if anyone's ever done this render of an interior with some kind of Pixar-esque lighting and done it right, it would be this one, right? Yeah. So that's the one I would kind of immediately gravitate towards and go like, oh, how did he do that? What colors did he use? What values did he use? What did he use to kind of like break up the scene, make it look more interesting? So even just in terms of composition, he's got this really great, centralized composition where the light is right in the middle of the shot. And then he's got these kind of like perfectly, in the rule of thirds, like these hangers hanging down. He's got stuff trailing the floor. These kind of all of these different leading lines into the image. So they're different like things that will encourage you to look at the focal point of the image, which is the bright monitors and the chair and, these perfect silhouettes and stuff. And when I look at a scene like that, where it's been very carefully composed, that's really what I would say, like, you should try to go for.
That's great.
I think, yeah, just like looking at the compositions of those shots, just those screenshots, maybe widening them out a little bit, showing a bit more of the room. There's a saying, I was taught by a German cinematic director, and he always used to say this saying in German that was, he always said to me, Joel, this does not translate into English, but it's something like this. It's foreground makes the image round. And I was like, that doesn't really rhyme. And he's like, yeah, but it does rhyme in German. It rhymes in German. I'm like, what? I don't know, man. Like, it doesn't rhyme in English. So, but foreground makes the image round. I think that's it. But yeah, so the idea is that you put something in the foreground and it makes the image feel more coherent, more cohesive. And it makes it feel like there's depth to the image and stuff. So, I mean, that's what Victor is doing by putting all the cables and stuff in the way and like silhouetting them and all that kind of thing. So I think that would really help, hanging cables and having a bit of the floor that kind of comes towards the camera. That really is really nice too.
Okay. Let's take a look. Emily, did you send me two different? There we go. Okay, so here's Emily's. Okay. So this is her project. She took basically a scene from Witcher in-game, and then the goal was just to remake it with today's tech.
Oh, cool game. It's a cool game to work from as well because they have an interesting art style and stuff. They have a really like saturated art style, which is yeah, it's weird because I think in some shots I don't like how it looks, but then I see certain shots, other shots, and I'm like, wow, this is actually really cool. Let me just refresh how I feel about the Witcher 3 environment stuff because I have no idea. Like, I remember the game looks stunning to play. Yeah, so I mean, with a scene like this, it's a bit like there's. I think the one problem is that the darkness level seems a little bit off. Like the blackest part of the image, the darkest part of the image that you could find. There's no single part where it gets really, really dark, and that means the whole thing feels a bit like foggy and far away. Which I don't know. I think it, and that's fine, but I think it's just like a little bit darker in the darkest corners. So I mean, I'm not saying crush the image down completely, but there's definitely like something that's like too much, either it's too much fog or it's a bit too much atmosphere. And what it might be as well is it might be that there's a lot of atmosphere, but it's atmosphere without a sort of light direction. So usually if you'd have that much atmosphere, you could take like a focal point of the image and you could basically use the light shafts to point to the central focal point, right? So there would be like just maybe one really detailed part. So like you would get the light and kind of like hit one part of the roof of the church, and then that same light would kind of like light beam would come down and hit like one or two of the graves on the bottom. But then the rest of the image, you'd kind of darken it down a bit, right? Something like that. And then you've kind of got the trees, dappled lighting coming from the trees that kind of gives it that look. That would be the way that maybe you try and make it look, if it looks if you're going for a stylized kind of thing. Of course, if you're going for a complete like photorealistic look, it's not really a Witcher thing though, photorealism. Witcher's it's got this kind of fantasy, it's got high fantasy, really bright colors, really saturated stuff going on.
Yeah. Is the environment art career path jobs? I mean, is this something where in Europe that you see demand? It's still picking up. Things are still going well? Absolutely.
I mean, to be honest, in the last couple of years, the amount of times that I've had people say, can you recommend an environment artist in Unreal Engine 4? And then I've had to tell them like, I mean, if you want a guy that can build a whole world for like an MMO or whatever, or like build a whole level, the amount of people that can actually do that, I could say maybe there are like 5 or 6 of them in the whole world that I even know about. And most of them are already hired. So I would say if you can master the skills, you're immediately going to be whipped up by a AAA games company. Immediately. Even if you're not super good or something. If you just have some cool open world examples, if you would take a shot from The Witcher, which would be like a landscape shot, and try and recreate it in Unreal. And, even just using stuff on the marketplace, like you go download Brushify, you take some of the assets, you rearrange them, you put some background mountains there. I've got the road system, you make a few roads, and then that's it, right? You're basically already on your way to building something that already looks like The Witcher. And what's mind-blowing is that, like, I think when you do get to that level, that it will be very, very soon that people will start to get in touch with you and say, like, hey, can you build me this map for this game? Because I just desperately need a level designer or an environment artist. So yeah, it's definitely viable, especially for open world stuff. There's just so much demand.
That's awesome. That's really great to hear too. All right, Joe, man, again, thank you so much. I really enjoyed meeting you, and thanks for sharing your insights and for having a conversation.
No problem, dude. Great talking with you. Thanks for having me.
All right. So I want to thank you so much for being here, for taking the time, and for listening to this podcast. And I want to ask a couple of things from you. Number one, make sure you leave a comment or you rate this on iTunes, Stitcher, wherever it is that you're getting this. That's going to make a big difference in helping us get the word out and get people to know who we are. All right. The other thing is I want to make sure you know where to find us. So you can head over to www.gameartinstitute.com, where you can learn about our flagship program, which is the Game Artist Bootcamp. This is designed for those who are really looking to move the needle on their career and really lock in that job. You may have gone to school and learned a bunch, maybe haven't learned a bunch. But at the Game Art Institute, the primary focus we have is the very specific industry skills the triggers that you really need to hit in that job interview. What are the specific things that they're looking for? That's what we're going to be training you on. We're taking applications right now for environment artists and for character artists. So make sure you head over to www.gameartinstitute.com and apply today. That way we can have that conversation, make sure this is a fit for you, make sure that you're a fit for it, and if everything is perfect, then we will sign you up for that right away and get you into your training and start moving the needle on your career. All right, thank you so much again for being here. Take care, have an amazing day.